Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, how are you doing, Matthias?
Hey, how's it going? Great.
Good. Looks so nice and sunny where you are. Are you back at the arcade? Yeah. Look at that. Great light. Oh, we can't hear you, but it looks good.
Oh, I said
There
we
you
have
go,
one
there you
of
go.
these big arc windows, so it's actually
Hmm.
maybe too much light.
Yeah, that looks nice.
Um, thank you. You're always welcome, as mentioned before. Open
Yes,
hours is
right.
Saturdays 1 to 5, and we
Mm,
we could also host a meeting here.
yeah. If this meeting had a little bit more leeway, maybe we could all met there. Would have been nice. All right, I think we'll probably wait for a few more and then Betty, I don't know if you'll get started. Yeah.
Yeah, we can wait for a couple minutes as folks trickle in. Maybe we'll get started at like 3:05. Simone, do you know if the congressman will be joining us to start the meeting or if you'd like to say a few words?
He certainly will be. He's just coming out of a meeting now, so I just need a couple minutes and I'll get him in front of here.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Hello. Sorry I'm late. Can you all hear me? Great. Mikhail, you want me to just kick it off? All right, I will. I'll start. Look, thank you all for joining us. This was an idea that the co-chairs and I had to have the advisory groups meet directly with um, the task force so that we could not only hear directly from you, but get an opportunity to ask questions so that we can get more educated on your area of expertise and how we can integrate that into the overall project. I think it's important, obviously, just to recognize off the top that there's a lot of uncertainty in New York City government right now. And there's certainly been a number of discussions among the elected officials, the chairs, the EDC, the state. I spoke to the governor yesterday about this project, and I am actually quite happy with where we are, in the sense that there's a real determination to continue to move forward. We have a tremendous amount of momentum. We've gotten a good amount of funding that will almost certainly go away if we don't complete this process. And it's always been a joint endeavor among the city, state, and the federal level. And the governor reiterated her commitment to this project yesterday, and that we're gonna push forward. EDC has the sort of full authority from City Hall to continue to push forward, and at some point, we'll have a city budget and we'll figure out what the structure of the government is, and we'll work within that. But we're going full speed ahead, and we're going to continue pushing with this momentum that we have. Now, just turning to today's topic, obviously, this is an area, frankly, that the task force has not spoken about extensively yet. I think EDC and WXY have been thinking about it a fair bit, but we have not yet gotten to some of the issues related to transportation, related to mobility. And so this is really important for you all to provide us with that perspective and what the opportunities are, what the risks are, and the different types of things that we should be thinking about. And so, why doesn't the project team, I guess, start just outlining some of the feedback that you've all collected, and then we can open it up to a conversation, if that sounds good.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to be here with us for this meeting. For the advisory group, we do have just a couple of slides before we open it up to the broader discussion. And we really wanted to start with grounding the task force members who have joined us today with the feedback that we've heard from the advisory group so far. And so just, very high level summary in terms of, the needs first around transportation and mobility. The proposal for a truck exclusive road that can remove trucks off of the neighborhood streets and separate truck traffic from vehicles and pedestrians. We've heard that in advisory group meetings. We have also heard that in our public workshops and from local stakeholders. We've also heard about the critical need for public transportation and public transit, including proposals around bus rapid transit and light rail, along with the need for a really comprehensive vision around mobility beyond just vehicle-centric road infrastructure. And so how can we really center public transit as part of this proposal? There's also been a lot of feedback about developing a direct connection to Lower Manhattan via bus. And so we've heard this from the Red Hood Bus Coalition and others about a connection through the Hugh Carey Tunnel to get folks into Lower Manhattan easier. And we've heard support for strengthening connections between Governor's Island and BMT via the ferry. So consideration for adapting the landing site at Atlantic Basin and thinking about ferry connectivity, particularly for Red Hook. On broader connectivity, there's been a focus on improving the porosity and connectivity both north and south with the adjacent communities. And though there's been specific support for through streets over the BQE trench to enhance neighborhood access, as well as interest in protected bike routes in Carroll Gardens and Cobble Hill to connect to the Greenway. And then we've heard a lot of interest and feedback in open space. So advocacy for additional green spaces, particularly at Pier 7, support for the Fort Defiance Park proposal, and then how to explore green street corridors, public rooftop open space, and blue spaces that can connect the community with direct access to the water. And I'm sure as we talk this afternoon, we'll hear more details and more thoughts on this, but wanted to just ground us in the very high level of what we've heard to date. So just to highlight the conversations we've had around current transportation issues, obviously BQE congestion causes a lot of challenges in these communities. There's the fact that we have overlapping truck, bus, car, and bike usage. Intra-neighborhood, particularly on the local commercial streets, Columbia and Van Brunt, we've seen high congestion, we've seen lower speeds, and we've heard how these have negatively impacted the retail corridors. And so from the map here, you can see some of the feedback. Again, congestion from BQE spilling over, but also, the noise pollution and safety challenges because of the congested streets. So when we think about the potential for public investment, the ask that we've heard is how can we improve local transportation, improve the network to address vehicle congestion in general, but also improve bus speeds in particular. And so we have talked a little bit about this Spine Road, a new truck route for inter-neighborhood traffic that could move into BMT and off of the local streets, as well as new bus lanes on Van Brunt and Columbia to improve bus speeds. On the open space side, we've heard a lot of asks to provide a range of open space options that are connected through an enhanced greenway. So, down on the southern end, how can we activate the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal and Atlantic Basin with more waterfront open space and programming space? We've heard asks about destination parks that can complement existing open space, but also really integrate resiliency, which is, a key focus for the community. We've heard asks about safer, more direct, and a wider greenway that could accommodate recreation while connecting the community, and waterfront access, which I mentioned before as we're thinking about a network of local open spaces. And then just honing in on resiliency a little bit more. Obviously, a lot of thought has gone into resiliency, particularly the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project led by DDC. But thinking about how we can build and enhance on that to protect the site, but also the adjoining neighborhoods against the threats from sea level rise and climate change. So things like elevating buildings and substations, thinking critically about stormwater management, site-wide resiliency that could be built through a combination of elevation changes, flood walls, and stormwater drainage, and these strategies being integrated into the open spaces throughout BMT. So I'm going to stop there, and we can pull down the slides. I think, building on what the congressman said, a lot of the focus of today's meeting is for the task force to hear directly from the advisory group members about your priorities, your areas of expertise, and would love to just open the floor for initial questions or feedback. And perhaps I'll actually start with Tiffany, if you don't mind me going into a camp counselor mode. But as as RPA and your leadership role as chair, interested to know your thoughts on our summary of the takeaways so far.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I was about to unmute myself anyway. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Good to see you as always. Yeah, I actually think that this is an adequate summary of the discussions that we've had. I think the biggest challenge with our group is the transportation piece is so critical, but also it's very chicken and egg, because we don't know what ultimately is being planned here, right? And so I think many of us in the advisory group fully understand that depending on what goes here is going to impact the traffic patterns, and where you're going to be entering and exiting the site. There's definitely larger conversations about the ability to provide additional transportation, right? Because that, in the large sense, can exist beyond, say, the jurisdiction of city DOT. So now you're asking for MTA to intervene. And I probably don't have to tell you how I spent my day yesterday, given the news with the MTA. And so that presents another layer of conversation that, ultimately we can't really have right now. I think that we've also had the opportunity to really talk about climate change, or at least rather climate resiliency, I should say, in that definitely impacts the site and what we want to put here. There's been some proposals put forward before. Matthias, in particular, has put some proposals before that highlight or at least like embrace the facts that climate resiliency is absolutely necessary here in whatever we put. And I think the idea of the spine road in particular was interesting as presented to us. And I think that we have thought that if you're going to incorporate something like that, then maybe there is, as you mentioned earlier, Mikkel, an opportunity to perhaps restrict it to maybe trucks or large vehicles rather than just replicating another through street for traffic. So I think, oh, and I think lastly, and then I'll actually turn over to Hunter because he's been patiently waiting. I think not just for our group, but perhaps as a part of the larger task force, are questions about where any input from the Port Authority would have been incredibly helpful, just given their stewardship of the property prior to the city taking it over. And then just another layer of expertise in this space in recognizing this piece of land as part of the larger ecosystem for the harbor. And so, understand they're not part of the conversations right now, but I at least wanted to give voice to that's come up a few times in our discussions. So Hunter, I'll turn over to you and then back to others.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tiffany. Good to meet the task force. I'll just go through a few items here, and then maybe the task force can, if the idea is the task force is responding or just listening, we'll interested in a response if that's going to happen. But I think kind of item number one, at least on my end, and perhaps others in this advisory group will agree, it's been a little unclear about how much this sort of master planning process affects kind of the area outside the perimeter of the BMT. So as we talk about transportation and open space, a lot of these things need to be investments outside of the BMT site in the existing neighborhood that's already there. And so I think we really would like to kind of expand the scope of this project to be not just sort of the perimeters of the BMT. And Tiffany, I think you raised a good point about transportation. I think we already have an existing neighborhood there that Red Hook, which does not have adequate mass transit. And so I think, whatever the future of the BMT is, it really would be good to commit to better mass transit, better connections to Lower Manhattan in a relatively straightforward way, and other parts of Brooklyn in this area. And I think regarding the climate resilience, it feels like climate resilience, how that's being factored into the state, and mass transit, those feel like the biggest issues to resolve before we can really kind of seriously address other things like housing or other items that have been proposed. I think I'll just also point out that within the spine, I think Mikkel's presentation said, accommodate that for truck traffic. I think we anticipate if this is a working waterfront and it's successful, or even if it's a residential neighborhood, whatever format it takes, there will be significant commercial micromobility. And I think expanding connections to the greenway, expanding the greenway itself, and also accommodating not just truck traffic within the site, but if there are, cargo bikes, et cetera, serving the working waterfront, can adequate infrastructure be built within the site to accommodate them to the extent possible within the BMT? So really looking at, interior of the site, accommodating as much, commercial traffic, be it micromobility or trucks, as well as really looking at the neighborhood much more holistically. I think that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Hunter. Lara?
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to listen to a response to Hunter's questions first. I mean, there are certainly questions that we've all discussed in the task force, unless you want to just jump to the next topic. Or I'm not sure what the plan is, whether anybody's going to plan to respond to Hunter now, or whether these are questions that you'll take away and come back to us with more information on.
Well, I think the goals and, the congressman or task force members can correct me if I'm wrong, is part of the goal here is for the task force members to hear from all of you sort of directly, rather than project team sort of responding to each one. So I think that, we're happy to jump in and answer specific questions, but I know there's really a deep interest from the task force members to hear from the advisory group directly, including on the questions that Hunter and Tiffany raised.
I do think, Mikkel, I agree with you. Let's go through everything. And but if you guys can just take a note of these questions, and hopefully at the end, if there are some perhaps general responses, I think that would be helpful for us on the task force, just to understand what work has been done and what perspective you all have in response to, what are very important questions.
Okay, so sorry, someone's going to answer the phone here in a second. So I guess the concerns and the questions that I have are really about wanting to understand more about the spine road, for example. It's not really clear. I understand the thinking is that would redistribute some of the truck traffic that's currently on, Columbia and other streets, but I'm concerned that in fact it would just incentivize even more truck traffic. Maybe I just don't fully understand how it would work. I don't think any of us do. So any more clarity on that would be, and detail would be welcome. We, the BHA and the Environmental Justice Coalition that we work with, the BQE EJC, have been arguing in accordance with the, former mayor's expert panel on the BQE, that what we really need to do is look at a long-term corridor-wide plan for the BQE that would allow us to, dramatically reduce or even at some point potentially remove that highway. And our fears with something like this are that in fact we're hard coding that truck traffic, on and off the BQE. We've asked DOT to look at closing the Atlantic Avenue entrance, Queensbound entrance to the BQE, which we finally was also a recommendation in the expert panel report, which we finally got DOT to agree to look at as part of the BQE process. And that, our organization and many others, the Atlantic Avenue BID, the Cobble Hill Association, have been asking for a closure there for all of the reasons, the lack of safety that it brings to Atlantic Avenue, the traffic that it specifically brings into the neighborhood, including those trucks that are on Columbia right now that you're trying to mitigate, are there because they're getting on and off the BQE. So just really having a lot of concerns about how the connections between this project and the BQE how the spine road would work, what you're envisioning, you know, how you imagine that that's going to improve the situation rather than, you know, make existing conditions worse for the future. Something I'd like to understand more about. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Haya from the planning team at EDC. I'll try to answer at least parts of your question. I think like the first question was, how does the spine road work to remove trucks off other streets, and like how will it kind of help mitigate some of the impacts for trucks on the neighborhood? And like fundamentally, the idea is that the spine road becomes the designated truck route through the area. So that would, you know, like legally move trucks off of the streets that are more integrated into the neighborhood, like Van Brunt. The other thing that we're trying to kind of test out and understand as we're doing site planning is how we kind of drive trucks to the Hamilton Avenue entrance rather than having them go all the way up to Atlantic Avenue, as they do now for their access to the BQE. So working on like making sure that the access points from the container terminal specifically, which we can kind of redesign and we have the opportunity to redesign, kind of drive traffic to Hamilton instead of up to Atlantic.
But I think before I take Hank's comment or question next, I think the point that you're making, Laura, which speaks back to what Hunter raised as well, is still the remaining questions about, you know, the spine itself and the interconnectivity into the neighborhood and sort of what's happening outside of the 120 acres. I certainly hear and understand the frustration that we haven't been able to get into the weeds of that proposal with you all. As the congressman said at the beginning of the meeting, that material is actually going to the task force just next week for us to really start to socialize what our thoughts as planning team, conversations with DOT and others about what that proposal is. And we're really looking forward to then sharing with that with all of you who, you know, really understand the implications of our proposal best, to get your feedback. So that is coming, as the congressman said at the top. Hank?
Yeah, I mean, Laura, well, first with Hunters, absolutely improving, expanding the greenway, that should be a no-brainer. That should, and expanding mass transit all up and down the route to the extent we can, realizing that that requires the cooperation of the MTA. Absolutely, that's a no-brainer. But to Laura's point, we keep referring to this internal truck highway. And what I still do not have a clue is how you guys actually imagine that working. I mean, a truck route has a start point and an end point, and it would have places where it rejoined the area outside BMT. And if the contemplation is that one of those, you know, you talk about trying to encourage movement toward Hamilton Avenue rather than Atlantic Avenue, but there's no place to put it on Atlantic Avenue without making an existing problem worse. So, you know, that's point number one. So I have no idea when you say we're going to have a truck route. Look, if you're talking about to the extent that there's internal truck traffic within the BMT site, we're going to keep it off the city streets and do it internally. That I understand, that makes sense. Although I'd hope there wouldn't be more of that traffic than we need. But if the notion is that you're creating additional lanes of truck traffic, what the city DOT refers to as a truck route, I have no idea where it's coming from. I have no idea where it's going to. And I have a firm belief that what you're proposing would just make things worse. The other point, and Lara was correct about this, and this was Sam Schwartz's recommendation. It was the recommendation of the mayor's expert panel. It was endorsed by RPA, and it was part of the former mayor's plan for what to do with the BQE, was that you close the Atlantic Avenue entrance, because the reason today you have all that extra traffic on Columbia and on Hicks is because people treat those streets like extra lanes of the BQE. And if they don't like the traffic on the BQE, they get off, just like a service road on the Grand Central. They get off, and the only reason they can do that is because they know they can get right back on at Atlantic Avenue, which creates a mess. So creating another couple of lanes that function the same way would make the matter worse. I mean, the answer to the traffic on those side streets has been clear for 4 years now, 5 years. And, I don't think that's really a debate. The final point about truck routes, to the extent that you're proposing that if we create a truck route on the BMT site, that's going to get trucks off other streets, nice try. But one of the basic facts about truck routes in the city of New York, having administered them, is that there is zero enforcement. Zero. So you can decree truck routes, you can create new ones, you can eliminate old ones all you want, but until you've got a mechanism for enforcing them, which currently doesn't exist because the cops don't prioritize it. We can get into whether they should or not, but it's a fact of life that there is zero enforcement in the city of New York today. So you can draw it on the map all you want, but that isn't actually going to make a difference or address any of the problems that the community groups are appropriately raising.
Thank you, Hank. I think I want to take Matthias's comment or question next, and then we'll come back to both.
Thank you, Mikhail, and it's good to see you again. So I'm a bit of a veteran to this traffic, truck, and routes conversation by this point, having participated in the cruise terminal conversations, in the last mile conversations, and in general the traffic concerns in the neighborhood. I want to piggyback on what was being discussed just now and brought up by Hank. I think beyond looking at where to move the truck route to reduce exposure, we need to be thinking about how to reduce the reliance on trucks in terms of moving goods. And this is by this point a bit of a vintage concept, but because it hasn't moved beyond the concept stage, the idea of activating the waterways for goods distribution, the concept of the blue highway. I believe that as we are having these conversations, both in terms of open space and mobility, I would like to see this as an opportunity to go from the concept to an actual plan of how the activation of the BM site would participate on that. Not only holding space, but actually, moving it forward for it. And second, I would just like to ask the congressman how familiar he is with the For Defiance plan or proposal at this point.
Sorry, which plan is that?
The For Defiance proposal for a large open space in Red Hook with a historic park overlay and resiliency hub. I don't know how familiar you are with it.
Where would that be?
This is a proposal that our group has been working on since December last year for the UPS site.
Oh, no, I'm not. I haven't heard much about that.
Okay, so just to highlight one of the shortcomings of the process that we've had so far in terms of an advisory group presenting proposals. I don't believe that by this point, the work that we've put forward, both in the advisory group as sharing materials on this, has reached effectively the task force. So, I'm glad to have continuous opportunities to present this by seeing that it's not really reflected on the scenarios, whether that's because of a lack of consideration or because it was considered but not incorporated, I would say it's a sign of concern for the mechanism for sharing proposals and those being waived in on the process.
I can tell you, Matthias, that there's been very little discussion about the UPS site because there's been very little progress with UPS. And the latest conversations we have been having do not include that site as part of the project. If that changes, I'm confident that we will learn about the proposed alternative, and certainly want to consider that.
Well, thank you for addressing this. In fact, as I was saying, connecting it back to the opportunity to activate and move forward the vision for moving goods through the water, we have proposed the possibility of a land swap with UPS for a long-term contract, which would make them a partner in activating the Blue Highway vision, moving that forward, while addressing resiliency concerns in Red Hook and creating an engine for local economic growth. So I wonder what is the best way to circulate the information at large with the task force for our proposal in regards to Fort Defiance Park. And lastly, in terms of mass transit and the Red Hook Bus to Manhattan coalition, which is something we've been also advocating for, I'll just repeat what I said earlier on in the process, that good transit decisions exist downstream from good land use decisions. So until there's more clarity on the different land use throughout the site, it's hard to advocate for what we could expect to be successful mass transit efforts. Having said that, the need to improve mass transit in Red Hook is evident. It has been for about 30 years, which is the amount of time it has been unaddressed. And that's all I have to share at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. I think that you're raising a very good point, because I know while the project team has met with you about the Fort Defiance proposal, I think what we can do is certainly circulate it to the task force members and the leadership so that they have a chance to review. As the congressman noted, and as I know you are very well aware, the UPS site is complicated. But that said, we know that you and others have done a lot of good work and good thinking on that, while the project team has taken into consideration, we can circulate to the task force as well. And then just going back to Hank's comments before Nancy. Hank, obviously, we appreciate your expertise on all of these issues, particularly on the truck route conversation. And while we're having really good coordination with DOT on the full proposal, I think we are looking forward to sharing this with the task force to really get into the weeds on the many items that you raised, particularly on the enforcement side. And I think some of the things that you said connected back to Matthias's thoughts about, the broader goal of trying to get more trucks off the road completely. With Matthias is a big part of this proposal, particularly on the Blue Highway and what we've been calling flex maritime and additional uses around, barging goods from Brooklyn up to Hunts Point in the Bronx. What trucks can we get off the road from that network? So all of these very critical feedback that we are working through as a project team, and look forward to coming back to you on. But let me stop there and then go to Nancy and then Amanda.
Nancy, you're muted actually.
Thank you, and thank you for that. I had just wanted to echo some of Mattia's comments and kind of take us to the open space conversation. And, first of all, I guess I would say it is, it is humbling to think about the many uses that this site is being called upon for, between the maritime industrial, housing, transportation problems. I mean, there's a lot that the site is being asked to optimize in this particular area. But with that, wanting to say a word about the importance of open space and make sure that it doesn't get lost within the conversation. I think it was probably all of us saw with all of the sort of public input process and polling and surveys that park and open space consistently, rated among the top uses that the community was calling for. And probably the one issue in which you had, sort of the most agreement in terms of its priority along the site. And I think that, we still, have to always remember and realize when we're thinking about urban planning that Brooklyn does suffer from a paucity of park and open space and green space. So I would urge the task force to please keep that in mind. And Matthias spoke about Fort Defiance Park. I would just like to say a note about park space at the northern end of the site, namely Pier 7. So you do have, Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is not a neighborhood park. It's a regional park that attracts millions and millions of visitors per year. Right now, it very much suffers, I would say, from the poorness of the access at Atlantic Avenue and the challenges of that, given Phoenix Beverages and all of the trucks that pull down off of Atlantic Avenue. So some additional open space in the northern section around Pier 7 that could complement this regional park that is enjoyed by so many visitors, I think is very much something that the committee should be and the task force should be considering as you advance your planning, in addition to open space throughout the site. So thank you for your work and for, sort of all of the kind of hard choices and decisions that you're going to have to make. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate that feedback. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to be here for this meeting. I won't echo everything that Hank said. I will say that that enforcement is probably the lowest on the list of issues with the Spine Road that Hank mentioned and with Atlantic Avenue. So I do hope that the intention is to address more than just the enforcement piece. My question for this advisory group, separate from the Spine Road piece, there's sort of two. The first is whether your view on additional traffic created by the proposed residential development. So if we stayed in the optimal port scenario, which has 7,000 to 9,000 units of housing being added predominantly on the Columbia stretch, what your view is for the transportation challenges and potential solutions there, and also whether you think there should be a restriction on vehicles within the site itself. And then secondarily, to what Nancy was just discussing, whether there had been a discussion in this group around the Atlantic Avenue interchange entrance and how to make that safer. I will note that under the most recent proposals with the optimal port, the port configurations, the portion of Pier 7 that is available for open space use has been significantly reduced to make space for a larger marginal pier, which would cut almost about 2/3, I think, of the Pier 7 usable space that would have gone to open space.
Let me jump in for a second. So the last time I think we met as an advisory group, I don't know that the full advisory group actually had a chance to see any of the scenarios because they'd been shared with the task force members. So like I saw them, but I don't think they had been shared because the task force hadn't had a chance to discuss them either. So is that still the case? I guess maybe that's a question for Mallory or Mikkel. Has the advisory group seen the different scenarios? No. Yeah. So Amanda, I guess the short answer to your story is we haven't had an opportunity to talk about what that looks like. But I will just reiterate, and for please others jump in after I finish. This is one of the things that I brought up in the beginning that has come up in this group is our concern about the fact that our task essentially as an advisory group is very chicken and egg because we don't know what's coming, but that we fully understand that depending on what you put there will impact how people are entering and exiting the site. Obviously, the question specifically around housing is not just, how do people get to the site, but how do people move around the site? And there was another thought that actually just left, but also the goods that would come to and from the site, right? Not just goods being served by businesses on the property themselves, but if you're also putting other uses on the site, they're going to need other deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. So at least a question has come up, but in terms of being able to drill down, we haven't had the chance because not everybody has seen the scenarios, but I invite other folks from the advisory group to jump in on that as well.
No, I would just second what you were saying, Tiffany. Until we actually can see scenarios, it's hard to respond to them. I mean, we can articulate our goals and our vision, and Nancy, I think your point is well taken that the site is being asked to serve a lot of purposes and a lot of users, and obviously not everybody's going to get 100% of what they want, but it's difficult to advise if we don't really understand what we're advising on fully. So appreciate the opportunity to have as much detail as we can, when that's available to us.
Thank you. Hunter?
Yeah, I would agree with how Laura just put it. I would just kind of reiterate, I think there are some really good proposals and plans for open space and mobility that have been discussed for decades at this point, improving the greenway, parks, bus access, etc. So I think there are some ideas in place. This hopefully could be an opportunity to start to advance them. But that being said, it'd be great to have a lot more detail. It feels very hypothetical right now in terms of what we're responding to.
Understood, and hearing the frustration at each of the levels, because it is both the details around, let's say, spine road and connectivity, but also broader about the porosity between the neighborhoods and the site itself, as well as the scenario elements. Nancy?
Yeah, I actually have more of an overall question. I think that all of us on the advisory group have agreed that the that the planning timeline seemed very accelerated. And from what we understood, a lot of that was being driven by federal funding and the concern that we not lose and or that we have the opportunity to apply for additional federal funding for the site. Given the sort of state of complete, I don't know what you would call it, if you would call it disarray or retrenchment or uncertainty or whatever you will on the federal side, I was wondering if those concerns about capturing federal dollars were still relevant in terms of informing the timeline of this project.
I'll take this one. Thank you, Nancy. It's a good question. Something we have really been grappling with. Balancing, having enough time to really go through all of the details and make sure we're reaching the best possible outcome, and a number of things that are pushing the urgency. Yes, the federal funding is one thing, and that's obviously all at risk, as you point out, regardless of whether we do everything right or not. But in terms of any government funding, it has to be in the city and state budgets for this year, if we are going to be able to move forward in early next year after the GPP process. We know right now that basically the container terminal is severely constrained. It needs to be partially, a stopgap fix, and we need, the piers are about to fall into the water. So there's urgency just in terms of moving it forward. There's also urgency in terms of all of the different government spending options. This, of course, is the master plan. It is not the final plan. And there is an expectation, and I think an understanding, that there will be community involvement in the RFP and GPP process as the final plan is worked out. I think several of you have hit on the sort of chicken and the egg problem that we have, which is we can come up with a master plan, but we are going to be somewhat beholden to the responses to an RFP and the responses from outside, entities, private entities who would be helping to redevelop this and to invest in it. And it's impossible to predict exactly what they will come with. And we also don't want to have such a narrow bandwidth for someone to fit in. And all of this is, I think, raises a valid concerns. And I think part of what we're grappling with is that the final master plan is something that has to have a little bit of flexibility, but we're going to ensure that the community continues to have involvement as this goes through the full GPP process, the environmental assessment, and the RFP. But it is, we just moved back we just added another month to this process to make sure that people feel comfortable. It is an expedited schedule, but there is momentum right now. And I think there's a general view that we have momentum. We've spent money on this. We have money allotted to it. And if we dawdle too much, we will lose all of that.
Congressman. I know we're coming close to time, but I also want to recognize that there are a few folks on the line who have not spoken yet, and so just wanted to open the floor in case there are any other comments or questions, either from advisory group members or task force members. Okay. So definitely want to thank everyone again for taking the time. You know, we certainly hear the frustration and the critique, particularly about the cadence at which information is coming out while we are on an expedited schedule, as the congressman explained. That said, I do want to make sure it's clear how much we appreciate all of the time and the energy that this group has given to this process to date. And I think that as we come into the coming weeks and more material is shown, particularly on the items that we discussed at the top of the meeting, that it will allow for more robust feedback and show how the inputs that we've received from all of you over the last few months are being assessed by the planning team. So we certainly appreciate your continued patience and participation with us. And I will just, before I close out completely, just check to see if either Tori on behalf of Senator Granardis or the congressman have any last comments.
I just want to thank you all for being here and the work you're doing. And I know I've met with a lot of you already, but if there's anything you want to kind of follow up with us, please, our office is always down to talk to you guys. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mikkel, for organizing this, and thank you all for joining us and for your commitment and involvement in this process. There's some fantastic institutional knowledge on this in this group that is incredibly valuable to us. And I would just reiterate what Tori said, which is do not hesitate to reach out to follow up or provide additional comments. I can assure you that the mobility and transportation issues, especially as well as the green space, are top of mind for all of us, and also are top of mind for the community based on the responses that we have gotten. So this is a critical focus for all of us, and your input is greatly valued and appreciated.
Thank you, Congressman. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.